is that the banks contributed to the weakness in the currency. And that is fundamentally incorrect because banks are agnostic when it comes to the exchange rate of the rand.
There has been lots of talk and arguably consternation about so-called manipulation of the rand by various banks. To drill down a little bit, Standard Chartered, a British multinational, admitted to manipulating the dollar-rand exchange rate and agreed to pay a 42.7 million rand fine. Joining me to understand some of this and the implications of the narrative going around is the chief economist at the Efficient Group, Dawie Roodt. Dawie, thank you very much for being with the CRA once again. Just to start off with, basic understanding of terms, where the reporting has been that Standard Chartered has admitted to this whole allegation. Your thoughts on that, first of all?
Hello, yes, thank you. Well, first of all, I'm not so sure they really admitted. What did happen, what we do know is that there was a settlement between Standard Chartered and the Competition Commission in South Africa, whereby they will pay just over 40 million rand. So that's a settlement and not, as far as I know, a commitment. And it's also not a fine. It is a settlement. And in a bigger picture, that is actually a very small amount of money. But in a case of Standard & Chartered is that they have already been found guilty by the Americans. So I think there could have been perhaps a possibility that they would have been found guilty in South Africa as well. But I think an important point to make here is that to prove these kind of allegations are extremely difficult. And perhaps we can talk a little bit about what it means to be a currency trader and what some of these terminologies mean, like, for example, a so-called double. And, I think what I've also picked up in the press is that the underlying message that I pick up from people that think that the banks did something horribly wrong here is that the banks contributed to the weakness in the currency. And that is fundamentally incorrect because banks are agnostic when it comes to the exchange rate of the rand. The banks, if they did something wrong, are simply interested in one thing, and that's to make more money. And they can make more money whether the rand appreciates or whether the rand depreciates. So I don't think that the banks can be blamed for the current weakness of the currency.
Dawie, just on that terminology, you already mentioned one or two, but this is also linked to a statement by the Competition Commission on the 15th of November that it was prosecuting 28 local and international banks for, quote, fixing bids, bid offer spreads, the spot exchange rate, and the exchange rate. Any of those terms that you want to highlight, or as you mentioned, in one's day-to-day work, as you would do as a currency trader, for example, what do you think are the most important terms for people to understand?
Yeah, I think a good starting point will be to talk about the so-called double, and I think many people will recognize a double. A double, if you go on airports typically, or if you go to another country and they want to exchange a currency, you go to a bureau de change, for instance, and they will offer you a double. A double means that they will tell you that they are prepared to buy dollars at a certain price, and they are prepared to sell dollars to you at a certain price. And those two prices are completely different. And when there's little competition, and you typically you do not find much competition on an airport, for example, you will find that those two prices are quite far away from one another. And that is referred to as a wide double. Now, when big companies or importers, when they trade in money, and if they want to buy dollars, as an example, they also go to a currency trader, and they also ask for a double. And the double on the currency traders, when we talk about large amounts of money, the double is usually much, much smaller. And that is usually an indication on whether there's good competition on a particular market. And that is a narrow double is an indicator of good competition. And if you go to the airport, you will find a large double, and that's usually an indication of fairly little competition, not enough competition. But how is a double determined in a market? A double is determined in a market by buyers and sellers in the market. So if there are many people and many buyers and sellers in the market and they all offer doubles, obviously the narrowest of double will be the market price, so to say. So if I'm a currency trader and you're a currency trader and you and I decide that, listen, I am not going to participate today, and then I will not provide my double or my buy and sell prices to the market, then the double could be a little bit wider. And you and I, we've decided that I'm not going to participate in the market today because there could be a big buyer coming into the market and you do not want competition, for example. And we decided over here that I will not participate in the market today. Now, that is basically impossible to prove, because how can you prove that? I decided not to participate unless you go to the competition commission and say, listen, we actually agreed upon this. So, and I think that's unlikely to happen, because some other day I will do you a favor, or you will do me a favor and you will not go to the market, whatever the case may be. So proving these kind of things are extremely difficult. But if it can be proved, you will find that the exchange rate of the currency will be slightly different. We're talking about fractions of cents here. So the exchange rate of the currency will be slightly different than what it would have been if there was no collusion, in my example, as an example. And in fact, if you go back in history, I don't think you will be able to determine by looking at the data whether there was collusion or not. So it will be absolutely tiny. And not only will it be tiny, it will be also in both directions. In other words, it will result in a slightly weaker currency or a slightly stronger currency. But over time, the market will simply smooth this out. So the point I want to make, even if there was collusion, then the country as such will not be affected because it is just too small. And the next day it will be reversed in the other direction in any event. But it doesn't mean that nobody lost out. It could have been that some individuals or some companies lost out because the double was not the real double in the market, as an example. So that is possible, that some companies or individuals lost out because they didn't get the best price. But the country did not lose out. And proving this is nearly impossible. And good luck to the competition commission. In the case of Standard & Chartered, what happened there is that they have, in fact, been found guilty by the Americans. But again, this was a settlement and not a fine. And as far as I know, they did not plead guilty of anything.
Dawie, just a final question in terms of statements that are moving around this week, and I'm sure will continue as we head towards the elections this year. So in responding to the Competition Commission statement, the Minister in the Presidency, Minister Kumbutso Ntshavheni, said that South Africa's private sector has no interest in developing the country and wants to, quote, ensure that the government collapses, end quote. So talking about rand manipulation, weakening the currency, I think there may be skirting around the fact that government policy does a lot more to either strengthen or devalue a currency, maybe than what they're misunderstanding here around rand manipulation.
Yeah, well, I heard that comment by the minister. When I listened to that comment, it made my blood absolutely boil, because the reason why the South African economy is where it is because of the mismanagement by the South African economy by the ANC government, because of the incompetence and quite often because of their corruption. The contribution by the banks to the woes of the South African economy, in fact, what the banks and what private sector is doing, they are the only parts of the South African economy that's trying to keep the economy upright, because we actually have a government that is actively undermining the South African economy. And if it wasn't for the private sector, there would not have been anything left in the South African economy. What we clearly have in South Africa is we don't have an economic problem because we know how to fix our economic issues. But what we do have, we have a political problem because we've got a government that certainly goes out of their way to undermine the South African as much as possible. This is a case where government are trying to point a finger to somebody else because they realize that they are the reason why the South African economy is where it is today.
Dawie Roodt, thank you very much for your time. We'll talk to you again very soon at the CRA. Safe travels. Take care.